Chapter 7. Fail and Farewell. And as he grew older, his powerful body slowly began to break down. By the time he'd lived his 60th year, the decades of careless alcoholism had weakened the vital organs, and his energy sagged. The walk home took longer. The digestive system provided more spiteful and erratic performance. The liquor was harder to hold down. You could hear him breathe if you sat in the same room, as the lungs required more and more help to do their job. He sat often more out of general fatigue now than out of the old boorish laziness. And for hours he sat in his slippers, aimlessly working crossword puzzles out of the newspaper. The hair had thinned, even to some extent in the nicotine-stained mustache. He took a less taxing job as a spinner at a textile mill, but Cyrus still missed days of work, nursing sore joints and muscles. What once had been a simple and merely a diversion on the way to the tavern now became a complex, troublesome effort, and the tavern a mandatory recuperative stop. Then after the tavern, the endless vomiting, sometimes all through the night, and to recuperate from that, a noxious mixture of vinegar and raw eggs. Money, even the money Mum ferreted secretly out of his pockets at night, became more scarce. Mum saw the dilemma approaching afar off, and the old fleeting impulse rose up within her. She had to quell it deliberately. Only because she was too tired and older and worn down did she not automatically dash away from the trouble like a scared rabbit. The restaurant then was Mum's idea. Someone was selling it and she decided we could buy it and run it as a family. An absurd notion on the surface given the history and the dynamics of our particular family. Yet none of us considered that. We only heard that we were buying a restaurant, and because we had not learned to exercise preferences, we followed accordingly. In a restaurant, one could live without the old man. He could spend as many days as he was able to sleep as many days as he needed, and the restaurant, in theory, would supply the financial needs of the rest of us. That my mother, after a lifetime of flight, could not realistically hope to succeed in her first such rude adventure was never discussed. She had worked here and there as a waitress in restaurants and coffee shops around the area. A month here, a few weeks there, when times were especially tough and the work was available, and she felt comfortable taking on a restaurant operation. But we would have to live above the restaurant, in an apartment that normally housed the owners. The house on the ridge would have to be sold and vacated. It was a scene of so much hurt, the catalyst of so much trauma. I should never have minded leaving it. In every corner, in every shadow, I saw tragic memories. And yet, with my threadbare sense of security, this was my familiar world, the womb in which I had found the only nourishment I had known, even tainted as it was. I was glum the day we moved out, as the years swept by once again on the movie screen of my mind. For a brief, glimmering moment, each event was called up, displayed, and then replaced by the next. Each brutal beating, every surreptitious meal, every riotous round of play with my brothers in the yard, and I recalled those moments of revelation when I began the long, torturous process of learning who I was. Mum could not remember when my birthday was, not for certain. She had gone to Brantford on that day in a panic of personal turmoil, and she could never remember whether it was April the 27th or 28th. Children ask such questions as part of the natural course of growing up. And although Cyrus never allowed a birthday party or even acknowledgement of any sort, I found as a child that everyone else at school knew their birthdays, and I wanted to know mine as well. Mother made a mistake of wavering, caught off guard by the question in a moment when she was concentrating on something else. She was not prepared to choose one date over the other arbitrarily. April 27th, 28th, she responded without thinking. No, 27. Which is it? I quizzed innocently. Oh, Maury, it's not important, she answered, finally realizing what she had done. I couldn't get any further with her. She dodged and ducked, never looking in. My schoolmates found it ridiculous, a great source of fun, that I thought my birthday was April 27th or 28th. While I had a sufficient amount of shame and embarrassment over it, I resolved to do what my mother had not been able to do. I decided arbitrarily on Wednesday, April the 27th, and then pretended with gusto that this was indeed the accurate date. I was a circus freak to my schoolmates in other ways as well. Hey, Maury, the teasing questions always went. How come your older brothers and sisters are Wicks, and your younger brothers and sisters are Wicks? Well, you're a Blair. I had to get an answer from my mother, for I had to have an explanation for my classmates. It must have been a piercing question for her, a question that dredged up decades of dirty linen, stirring all the ugly past to the surface of the emotional pot. She had mucked up her memories with layers of lies. and after so many years she could no longer recall precisely what story she had presented to whom, nor exactly which of her distorted relationships would be best served by various versions of the truth. She sighed heavily as I looked at her big, once beautiful eyes, tired and heavy laden with years of hurts. "Just tell them," she told me, "that I was married 3 times and you were born to that middle husband." "But what happened to the first 2 husbands, Mom?" "They died, Maury, and your father was a hero, and he died in the World War." As a child, I could accept the story. As I grew up in the real world, I began to see how implausible it was. But quizzing Mom was as painful for me as it was for her. Her response, when I cut too deep, was to retreat into self-pity, making me feel guilty for casting dark doubts on her past by even asking such questions. It was skillful defense, in a way, for it avoided the pitfalls of cross-referencing lie-telling. But she made some errors sometimes anyway. Remembering the shame of her speedy return to Paris from the States when she was pregnant with me, she advised me that I had been born in the U.S., Byesville, Ohio, she said, a small town in the east central part of that state. She had actually never been there and perhaps chose the town at random from a road map. But to her mind, an artificial Byesville heritage would separate me from the painful reality that I had been conceived in fornication and delivered in furtive shame. Now, as I stood on the street watching the old house being emptied of its contents, I could see all of us in all those awkward times coping with the discrepancies. On the street, my half-brothers and half-sisters defended me, as we all defended each other against any nasty insinuations other children often made. Quick as they were to repeat stories they heard their parents telling about those wicks around the dinner table of their homes. We brothers in particular took the classic familial gang approach to growing up, punching the daylights out of rivals, particularly when one of them of our own number was threatened. I, for one, was not above taking on little girls as well. When I was in the 1st grade, my little brother Mark reported tearfully that a girl in my class had hit him. Puffed with anger, I marched up the street to her house. She was raking leaves in her front yard. "Did you hit my brother?" I demanded fiercely. "If you ever hit him again, I'll punch you." "If you take one step further toward me," she shot back at me, "I'll hit you over the head with this rake." "You," I sneered in return, "haven't got the guts." And I took the forbidden step. She swung the heavy metal rake clear over herself and landed it teeth first over my head. I ran home screaming, blood rushing down my face. In moments when the burden of truth was not being brought to bear, there were times of great camaraderie among the Wick children and the odd Blair brother. When one of the neighbors inexplicably asked my mother if she could give me a little red wagon, we had to keep the information from the old man. But thrilled as I was to receive such an incredible gift, I was not one to keep such a delight to myself anyway. My brothers and I piled into that new wagon with a hilarious vengeance, pushed and pulled and rolled ourselves all over the neighborhood, together, as brothers will. Likewise, when measles overwhelmed Paris, all of us took it together. The city put up quarantine signs all over the front of the house, while all of us cloistered inside like sickly monks, until the plague passed. Only Cyrus and Vective separated me from them in any way. On Christmas morning, Mark was always the first to awake. He brought back the report from downstairs, who got what, how much stuff was assembled around the tree. We shared the squealing delight until the rest went downstairs. Then, because of Cyrus, I took my position at the vent in the floor, smelled the turkey, listened to the laughter and the oohs and the ahs, the excited chattering of the children with new playthings, hoping that somehow someone would bring me a little something of my own. And then, a week later, we brothers faced the New Year's Eve ritual together. Mum and Cyrus always went partying together, leaving us all home together. But before they departed, Mum lined us up to give each of us a kiss. I was always squeamish as she came to me. I had never known her embrace, nor any physical expression of affection, and to have her kissing me now was disturbing. I squirmed, but she grabbed my head and gently pulled me toward her. I turned just enough her kiss would land on my cheek. It was as much as I could take. And then, with parents out of the door and the pressures off, we threw our own New Year's Eve celebration, complete with mad dog pillow fights and screaming and chaos. For a few brief hours, we enjoyed unadulterated exultation and wildness. Then, as the dawn approached, we scrambled to clean up our Holocaust. The making of our many Holocausts were now being forlornly carted out of the house and dragged downtown to the apartment above the restaurant. When the place was virtually empty, I wandered around inside for a while, feeling an odd emptiness inside myself that matched the echo of the stripped rooms. I was very much just the displaced 13-year-old wondering vaguely what would happen now that we were leaving our old neighborhood, and now that we were going to run a business, now that the old man was so sick. It was more of a task now, wreaking revenge on Alice's black bastard. It was something quite different to throw around a gangly, bespectacled 13-year-old than it had been to throw around a slightly underweight 7-year-old. As nature had increased my height on a normal schedule, Cyrus had accelerated his own deterioration by sloshing huge quantities of liquor into his system. He could still work up the energy to curse me and hurl verbal obscenities, but the obscenity of the physical abuse became more and more difficult for him. I looked at the staircase, the one he had climbed so often to do his particular injustice. My eyes followed it up to the bare bulb at the top, sticking out of the wall, its pull chain dangling limp and straight, the chain that the old man had tugged so many times on his way down the stairs, leaving me in the dark and alone. I stared at the bent on the floor, the channel of light that I had taken as a friend, now about to be abandoned forever. For all the aching sadness of those hours on the floor, peering through the grating at the activity below, I still felt a void as I thought of leaving it behind. The old man could be avoided now. He was slow to move, his anger reflex now spongy, where once it had been rigid. Now if I stayed simply out of his way, I could move a little more freely in the house. But now, when the freedom began to peek through, we were leaving the house. I would never know what the freedom could have felt like there. We called it Wick's Slop Shop, which infuriated Mum, for she had duly named it Wick's Restaurant. It was a typical greasy spoon joint, with booths on either side of a long, narrow aisle. She had borrowed to buy it and renovate it. I swept floors and washed dishes and waited tables, along with my brothers and sisters, with all the solemn seriousness of the Marx Brothers. Our white coats and uniforms were a poor facade for our zany frolicking. When our friends came in and put money in the jukebox, we showed them how to make the thing work for nothing. We gave school buddies credit for purchases, never expecting and never getting payment. I was to start high school the month Slop Shop opened. There was no decision to be made as far as I could see. School was doing me no visible good. The restaurant could be fun to play with, and my family, a casual revelation, needed me. 4 months passed while I got away with it. Then a former classmate of mine got caught working without a permit to quit school, and he spilled my beans to the truant officer. Maury Blair is doing it. Why can't I? The chief of police came snooping around, and when I defied his order to return to school, I wound up in front of a local judge. "You're so young," the judge said, sounding genuine in his concern. "Your marks are good, and you've got potential. You should be in school." I told him I was needed at home, but he didn't buy it. Reluctantly, bitterly, I returned to the classroom. On my birthday, I slipped into a new legal bracket and decided to try again. I applied for a chore boy's job at the mill and got it, but I still needed the chief's approval to quit school, legally. With my principal's sympathetic backing, I went to the chief of police and made my plea. He said he would think about it and let the principal know. I could check with the principal on Friday. I had to start work on Monday, and I felt the tension building. My situation was preposterous. I had no money for textbooks. My pants were far too big for me. I never took off my old army jacket because I was ashamed of what I was wearing underneath. Other students laughed at me constantly for my appearance of utter depravity. I had to get out and get to work. As I sat and stewed over the coming confrontation, I grew angry. Before leaving for school on Friday morning, I filled a pocket with alleys, big metal marbles, and determined to use them if the principal bore bad news. I knew they would throw me forcibly out of school if I hurled a handful of alleys into a teacher's face. It was the last day I ever spent in high school. I'd been released.